Over a century ago, Edgar Cayce, often called the Sleeping Prophet, shared visions and readings that still mystify us today. Among his most startling ideas was the suggestion that not every human being possesses a fully awakened soul. This controversial claim challenges everything we think we know about spirituality, humanity, and destiny. In this video, we will dive deep into Cayce's mysterious insights and explore what he really meant when he said, "Not everyone has a soul." Edgar Cayce's story is unlike anything you've ever heard. Born in 1877 in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, Cayce grew up in a poor farming family with little access to formal education. Yet, from a young age, he exhibited a profound sensitivity to the unseen world. As a child, he claimed to have visions of angels and spirits, and to receive mysterious messages during his dreams. His family was religious, and Cayce himself was deeply devoted to Christianity, often reading the Bible from beginning to end once each year. But what set him apart from the average believer was his incredible ability to enter a self-induced trance state and access knowledge far beyond his conscious mind's capabilities. By the time he reached adulthood, Cayce discovered that while in these trances, he could diagnose people's illnesses, suggest treatments, and even describe the nature of reality itself, topics he had no way of knowing about through ordinary means. Doctors, scholars, and ordinary people were stunned when he accurately prescribed medical treatments for conditions he had never personally witnessed, often recommending unconventional remedies that proved successful. Over time, Cayce expanded his readings beyond physical health. He began to speak about reincarnation, the origin of the soul, Atlantis, the nature of God, and the spiritual destiny of humanity. Despite his growing fame, Cayce remained humble. He considered his abilities a gift to be used for helping others, not for personal gain. He refused to charge for his readings for most of his life and lived simply, often struggling financially. Still, by the time of his death in 1945, he had given more than 14,000 documented readings, many of which are still preserved and studied today at the Association for Research and Enlightenment, ARE, in Virginia Beach. To the outside world, Cayce was a mystery. How could an uneducated man, with no training in medicine, philosophy, or theology, reveal such deep, complex, and accurate knowledge? Many considered him proof that there are levels of consciousness and dimensions of existence that remain invisible to most of us. Cayce himself insisted he was merely a channel, allowing universal knowledge to flow through him during his sleeping states. It was through these sessions that he revealed some of his most controversial ideas, including the notion that not every human being walking the earth has a fully developed or fully awakened soul. When Edgar Cayce spoke about the soul, he wasn't talking about something simple or one-dimensional. His descriptions were intricate, profound, and sometimes difficult to grasp. According to Cayce, the soul is the true self, the eternal part of a being that existed before birth and would continue to exist after death. In his view, the soul was not a static entity, but something dynamic, constantly evolving through countless experiences across many lifetimes. Each soul was on a journey, moving slowly but surely toward a state of greater understanding, unity with the divine, and eventually, oneness with God. But Cayce's revelations didn't stop there. He proposed that while the soul is divine in origin, its connection to the material world can be extremely fragile. In fact, he suggested that not every human being walking among us has fully connected to, or even activated, their true soul essence. Some individuals, he said, are primarily driven by their physical desires, material ambitions, and animal instincts. They might appear perfectly normal from the outside, functioning in society, holding jobs, raising families, but spiritually they are asleep. Their higher nature remains dormant, buried under layers of ego, fear, and worldly distraction. This doesn't mean they are evil or inherently bad. In Cayce's perspective, a soulless person is more like an incomplete being, someone who has yet to fully remember their divine origin. They are living through their lower self, without the guiding light of their higher self. Their lives are dominated by the immediate and the tangible, with little thought for eternity, morality, or the unseen spiritual dimensions that shape our destiny. Interestingly, Cayce linked this concept to the idea of reincarnation. He explained that souls reincarnate across different lifetimes to gather experiences, learn lessons, and gradually awaken to higher truths. However, if a soul becomes too entangled in material existence, too obsessed with power, pleasure, or selfishness, it can lose touch with its own higher nature. In extreme cases, this disconnection can persist for several lifetimes, leading to incarnations where the soul is so deeply asleep that it barely influences the person's behavior at all. This explains, Cayce said, why some people seem incapable of genuine compassion, wisdom, or spiritual awareness. It's not merely a matter of upbringing or circumstance. It is the state of their soul's evolution, or rather their soul's dormancy. Yet even these individuals are not beyond hope. Cayce believed that every soul, no matter how lost or dormant, could eventually awaken. Through suffering, love, divine intervention, or even sheer inner yearning, the sleeping soul could be stirred back to life. One of the most radical implications of Cayce's view was that we must be patient and compassionate with those who seem spiritually blind. Judgment serves no purpose because we do not know the ancient struggles another soul might have endured. Instead of labeling others as good or bad, Cayce urged us to recognize that we are all at different stages in an immense spiritual journey. A journey that ultimately leads everyone back to God, though some may take longer paths than others. In Cayce's teachings, the soul is a precious, eternal seed, sometimes thriving, sometimes lying dormant beneath the soil of human existence, waiting for the right conditions to awaken and grow toward the light. When Edgar Cayce spoke about the idea that some individuals were soulless, he did not mean that these people were physically different, or that they had no potential for spiritual life. His use of the term was far more subtle and nuanced. In Cayce's vision, the soul is an evolving consciousness, and not all human beings are equally connected to it. Some are so deeply entangled in material reality that their souls lie dormant, almost entirely disconnected from their daily existence. This disconnection is what Cayce referred to when he suggested that some people appear to live without a soul. To understand why some individuals might be considered soulless, we must first understand Cayce's broader cosmology. He believed that all souls originated from the Creator, pure and full of divine potential. However, as souls ventured into the physical realm, especially the earth plane, they encountered the temptations and distractions of material life. Power, pleasure, greed, fear, ambition. These forces pulled the soul's attention away from its divine origin and down into the lower vibrations of the physical world. Over time, if a soul surrendered completely to these impulses without striving for spiritual growth, it could become so deeply enmeshed in material existence that it lost awareness of itself as a divine being. Cayce warned that repeated lifetimes of selfishness, cruelty, ignorance, and material obsession could create layers upon layers of spiritual sleep. The soul would not be destroyed, it could never be destroyed, but it could become so buried under the weight of materialism that it would cease to function actively in a person's life. In such a state, the individual would move through life governed entirely by external desires and instincts, without any conscious awareness of the deeper realities that underlie existence. These people are not villains in the classic sense. They are not necessarily out to harm others. In fact, many of them might live perfectly ordinary lives, working, raising families, pursuing careers. They might even appear socially successful by worldly standards. Yet, beneath the surface, they are spiritually adrift. They live without a sense of higher purpose, without genuine empathy, without the hunger for truth that marks the awakening soul. Their decisions are driven by the immediate, what feels good, what brings status, what maintains security, rather than by any internal compass tuned to the divine. Cayce emphasized that this condition is not fixed for eternity. No soul is ever truly lost. Every soul, no matter how dormant, carries within it the divine spark. But in some lifetimes, the spark may be so faint that it does not illuminate the mind or the heart. Instead of seeking love, wisdom, and truth, the individual becomes trapped in a cycle of survival, competition, and self-centeredness. They are like seeds lying in hard, dry soil, seeds with the potential to bloom, but which remain untouched by the nourishing rain of spiritual awareness. There are many reasons why a soul might fall into such a state. Cayce suggested that trauma, deep fear, resentment, or repeated choices towards selfishness could gradually create a kind of spiritual inertia. Over time, the soul's voice becomes fainter and fainter until it is almost silent. Society itself, with its relentless focus on material success, pleasure, and superficial achievement, can accelerate this process. A soul that is already struggling to awaken might find it nearly impossible to hear its own inner call in a world so loud with distractions. In rare cases, Cayce hinted that some entities might not even be fully ensouled in the traditional sense. These are individuals who are more like biological beings, operating purely at the level of instinct and material desire, with only the faintest imprint of spiritual consciousness. This, he implied, could be a holdover from very ancient times when the soul's descent into matter was still incomplete. These beings are not evil but unfinished, still early in their long journey toward full spiritual awakening. It is important to stress that Cayce's message was never one of judgment or superiority. He did not teach that spiritually dormant individuals were less valuable in the eyes of God. Every soul, no matter how lost, was a beloved child of the divine, destined eventually to find its way home. However, he warned that interacting with such individuals could be challenging. They might lack the capacity for deep connection, for genuine compassion, or for moral insight. Trying to appeal to their higher nature might be like speaking a language they have not yet learned to understand. Cayce advised that instead of reacting with anger, frustration, or contempt, we should respond with patience and prayer. We should recognize that every encounter with a seemingly soulless person is an opportunity to plant a seed, to offer kindness, forgiveness, and light, even when it is not immediately returned. In doing so, we become instruments of awakening, helping to stir the sleeping soul beneath the hardened surface. In the end, Cayce's concept of the soulless human is not one of hopeless condemnation, but of tragic beauty. It reminds us that the human race is not composed of perfect beings or finished products. We are a tapestry of souls at all different stages of a grand cosmic journey. Some are wide awake, some are just beginning to stir, and some are still trapped in dreams of darkness and illusion, waiting, perhaps for lifetimes, to remember who they truly are. If Edgar Cayce's teachings about the nature of soulless individuals are true, then the way we view humanity, and even the way we define human dignity, must be reconsidered. For centuries, we have lived under the assumption that all people are fundamentally the same, born with equal capacities for love, morality, and spiritual understanding. But Cayce's insights suggest that while all beings are equal in their divine potential, they are not all at the same stage of spiritual development. Some are awake, some are asleep, some have activated their soul consciousness, others are still moving through life, governed solely by instinct and external desires. This view is both humbling and sobering. It forces us to confront a difficult truth, that not everyone we meet is capable of the depth of feeling, the moral reasoning, or the spiritual insight that we might expect from them. It explains why some people seem utterly indifferent to the suffering of others, why cruelty can be committed without apparent remorse, why empathy sometimes seems absent in those we would hope to trust. In Cayce's framework, these behaviors are not simply matters of character flaws or personal choices. They are symptoms of an undeveloped or dormant soul, a consciousness still sleeping within the shell of a human body. Imagine walking through the world and realizing that behind many of the faces you encounter, there is not a fully realized spiritual being, but rather a consciousness still half-formed, still struggling to awaken. It changes how you react to betrayal, selfishness, and violence. Instead of responding with outrage or hatred, you begin to see such actions as the flailing movements of a soul that has not yet remembered its true nature. You begin to understand that anger, resentment, and revenge are futile responses to spiritual immaturity. Just as you would not blame a child for not understanding advanced mathematics, you do not blame a spiritually dormant individual for failing to embody compassion or wisdom. Yet this perspective is not an excuse for passivity. It does not mean we must accept harmful behavior or allow ourselves to be mistreated. Rather, it invites us to recognize the limits of what certain individuals are capable of and to set appropriate boundaries with wisdom and compassion. Cayce's vision encourages us to act from a place of understanding rather than bitterness, to defend ourselves when necessary, but without sinking into hatred or despair. Furthermore, this teaching reshapes the idea of progress itself. If some people are operating with little to no connection to their soul, then the expectation that all humans will suddenly unite in universal brotherhood, enlightenment, or peace becomes unrealistic. Cayce's view suggests that spiritual evolution is an individual process, not a collective guarantee. Some souls are ready to ascend to higher understandings. Others are just beginning to crawl toward the light. The world we live in is a mixture of these varying stages, and it always has been. This understanding also brings clarity to the cycles of history. Wars, oppression, injustice, these are not random accidents, but the inevitable consequences of a world populated by souls at vastly different stages of awakening. Those driven by fear, greed, and power often rise to positions of influence precisely because they are adept at navigating a material world without the burden of conscience or spiritual insight. Meanwhile, those who are more awakened often find themselves marginalized, misunderstood, or persecuted because they are operating according to a higher set of values that are invisible to the spiritually dormant majority. However, Cayce's teaching is not meant to breed cynicism. Quite the opposite. It is meant to inspire patience, compassion, and a commitment to our own spiritual growth. If we cannot awaken others by force, we can at least shine as examples of what an awakened soul looks like. We can choose to be beacons of kindness, truth, and courage in a world where such qualities are desperately needed, but often unrecognized. Another profound implication of Cayce's idea is that love, the highest force in the universe, is not always reciprocated in the way we expect. When we offer kindness to a spiritually dormant person, they may not understand it. They may dismiss it, exploit it, or even mock it. But this does not mean that love is wasted. According to Cayce, every act of love leaves an imprint on the soul of the receiver, even if that imprint remains dormant for a long time. Like seeds planted in barren soil, these acts may not bloom immediately, but they prepare the ground for future awakening. In this sense, even the smallest gesture of compassion becomes a sacred act, a whisper to the sleeping soul, reminding it that it is not forgotten. On a personal level, Cayce's vision can be a source of profound inner peace. It allows us to release the burden of trying to fix or change others. It frees us from the exhausting cycles of disappointment and frustration that come from expecting spiritual depth from those who are not yet capable of it. We learn to accept others where they are, without condoning harmful behavior, and without losing hope in their ultimate destiny. We become more patient, more forgiving, not because we are naive, but because we see with clearer eyes. Finally, this understanding invites us to turn inward. Before we judge the spiritual dormancy of others, we must ask ourselves, in what ways are we still asleep? In what parts of our own lives are we still disconnected from our soul's calling? Cayce's teachings remind us that the path of awakening is not about identifying who is soulless. It is about ensuring that we continue to awaken more fully each day. Every moment offers a choice, to live from the surface or to live from the depths, to react with instinct or to respond with spirit, to remain trapped in illusion or to rise toward the divine reality that is our true home. Thus, Cayce's insight is not a message of despair, but a quiet, powerful invitation to see the world with greater understanding, to love without expectation, and to dedicate ourselves more fully to the long, patient journey of the soul's awakening. Although Edgar Cayce's message about the dormant soul may seem harsh at first glance, his ultimate teaching was one of immense hope and transformation. For Cayce, the soul was never truly lost. It could be forgotten, it could be buried, it could be almost extinguished beneath the heavy layers of material existence, but it could always be awakened. No matter how dark the night, the sunrise of spiritual awareness was always possible. In Cayce's view, the path to awakening the soul was not a mystery reserved for a chosen few. It was available to every person, at every moment, through simple yet profound practices. First and foremost among these was prayer. Not the mechanical repetition of words, but a living, breathing communication with the divine. Cayce often emphasized that sincere prayer opens a channel between the soul and its source, allowing divine energy to pour into the heart and reawaken the sleeping consciousness. Through prayer, even the most hardened and materialistic individual could begin to sense that there is more to life than what the eyes can see and the hands can touch. Alongside prayer, meditation was crucial. Cayce described meditation not just as relaxation or mental quieting, but as a deliberate tuning of the soul to higher realities. Through silent reflection, the individual could begin to peel away the layers of illusion, the false self built by fear, pride, and worldly ambition, and glimpse the eternal being that dwells within. Meditation helped to reorient the mind and heart toward the inner world, where the true self has always been waiting, patiently, lovingly. But awakening the soul was not merely an internal process. Cayce taught that outward action, especially service to others, was essential. Every act of kindness, every selfless gesture, every sacrifice made in the name of love and compassion nourished the soul and helped it to break through its slumber. Service was the soil in which the soul's roots could deepen and its blossoms could unfold. When a person gives freely to others, not for recognition, not for reward, but out of genuine love, they align themselves with the fundamental law of the universe, that all life is interconnected, that love is the force which binds us all. Cayce warned, however, that awakening is rarely a sudden event. It is a slow, often painful journey. The soul does not simply leap into full consciousness overnight. It stirs, it struggles, it wrestles with the illusions of the lower self. Old fears rise to the surface. Long-held resentments demand to be healed. Deep-seated attachments to material comfort must be loosened. Awakening the soul often feels at first like losing everything familiar. Relationships may change. Old ambitions may lose their meaning. The life that once seemed so solid may begin to feel fragile and uncertain. But in the midst of this crumbling, a deeper foundation is being laid. A foundation built not on the shifting sands of the material world, but on the eternal rock of spiritual truth. One of the most inspiring aspects of Cayce's message is that no effort is ever wasted. Even if a person makes only a small step toward awakening in this lifetime, that step will not be forgotten. Every act of prayer, every moment of self-reflection, every deed of kindness creates an imprint on the soul's journey. Even the soul that fails repeatedly, that falls back into old patterns again and again, is still moving forward. In Cayce's cosmology, failure is not damnation. It is simply a lesson, a temporary detour on the long road home. Cayce's vision also speaks deeply to the importance of forgiveness. He taught that forgiveness is not just about releasing others from blame. It is about freeing ourselves from the chains of anger and judgment that keep our souls trapped. To hold on to bitterness is to bind ourselves to the very material forces that obscure the soul's light. To forgive, even when it seems impossible, is to choose the soul's perspective over the ego's. It is an act of liberation, a signal to the universe that we are ready to move beyond the pain of the past and into the freedom of spiritual consciousness. Importantly, Cayce never portrayed the awakening of the soul as a solitary endeavor. While the journey is deeply personal, it is also profoundly communal. Souls are meant to awaken together, to help each other rise. One awakened soul can ignite others simply by living authentically, by embodying love and truth without preaching or demanding. In a world where many souls are still sleeping, the presence of even one awakened individual can act as a beacon, a lighthouse cutting through the fog of confusion and fear. Cayce also reminded us that divine assistance is always available. The higher forces, the angels, the spiritual guides, the very presence of God, are constantly working behind the scenes, gently nudging souls toward remembrance. Sometimes through dreams, sometimes through moments of deep sorrow, sometimes through unexpected blessings, the soul is called again and again to awaken. No one is ever truly alone. The entire universe conspires for our awakening, waiting patiently for the moment when we will open our eyes and see. In the end, Edgar Cayce's teachings about the soul lead to a simple yet profound conclusion. Awakening is not about achieving perfection. It is not about being flawless or saintly. It is about becoming real, about aligning more and more with the truth of who we already are beneath the illusions. It is about remembering that we are, and always have been, spiritual beings on a human journey, not the other way around. Awakening the soul is the real purpose of life. Every challenge, every joy, every sorrow, every encounter is part of this sacred process. The soul's slumber is deep, but the call to awaken is deeper still. And for those who heed it, no matter how long the journey, the destination is assured. A return to the light, the love, and the eternal life that has been our true home all along.